At 55 years old, I was on my knees scrubbing dried vomit off a gas station bathroom floor when the lawyer walked in wearing a $3,000 suit. The smell of bleach burned my nostrils as I looked up at him, my rubber gloves dripping with dirty water. "Are you Rodrik Fulton?" he asked, his voice echoing off the grimy tile walls. When I nodded, he handed me an envelope that would reveal why my uncle left me $340 million, and why my father had lied to me for 40 years. My name is Rodrik Fulton, and until that Tuesday morning, I was nobody. A failed warehouse supervisor, a divorced man whose wife left him for his wealthy cousin, a minimum-wage janitor at a Texaco station off Highway 65. My ex-wife, Melody, had left the same way she'd arrived, dramatically. "You'll die cleaning toilets," she'd said, her designer heels clicking against our hardwood floors as she walked out of the house I built with my own hands. She was half right. I was cleaning toilets, but I wasn't dead yet. The lawyer stood there in his pristine suit, looking like he'd taken a wrong turn on his way to a boardroom. I remember the flickering fluorescent light above us, buzzing softly, as if mocking the absurdity of that moment. A man worth millions of dollars talking to a janitor reeking of ammonia and defeat. He cleared his throat and said, "Mr. Fulton, I think you're going to want to sit down for this." And that's when my heart began to pound. Not from fear, but from the strange, impossible thought that my story, the one everyone forgot, wasn't over yet. Before we move on to what happens next, subscribe for more stories like this, and tell me where you're watching from. I didn't sit down right away. The lawyer stood there holding that thick manila envelope like it was radioactive. For a few seconds, all I could hear was the hum of the fluorescent light and the steady drip of the mop water pooling around my boots. I took off my gloves, wiped my hands on my uniform pants and said, "You've got the wrong guy." He smiled, that kind of patient, practiced smile that people wear when they deal with lost causes. "You're Rodrik James Fulton, born September 14th, 1968 in Little Rock, Arkansas, son of Charles and Linda Fulton, nephew of the late Mr. Harold Fulton." My knees went weak. Harold Fulton, my father's brother, the family's black sheep, the man I hadn't seen since I was 7 years old, the one my dad used to spit on the ground whenever his name came up. "Why?" I asked quietly. "Why would Harold leave me anything?" The lawyer adjusted his cufflinks, unbothered by the stench of bleach and despair around him. "I can't tell you that, sir. Not yet. But he left explicit instructions for you to come to his estate in Pine Hollow. It's about a 4-hour drive north. Once you're there, everything will be explained. Pine Hollow." The name hit me like a ghost. That was where my father and uncle grew up. I remembered a single visit there as a kid. A massive house tucked deep in the woods, all stone walls and wrought iron gates. I remembered sneaking off with my Uncle Harold to feed apples to the horses. And then, nothing. Because after that summer, my father told me never to mention his brother's name again. I stared at the envelope in the lawyer's hands. "What's in there?" "Your formal summons, and a check for travel expenses." I tore it open right there beside the mop bucket. Inside was a letter on thick cream paper with the Fulton family crest embossed in gold. And tucked inside, a check, $10,000, made out to me, $10,000, more money than I'd seen in years. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at it. When you've been kicked down long enough, your first instinct isn't hope, it's suspicion. My cousin Garrett, the one Melody ran off with, had inherited everything when Uncle Harold died, or so I'd heard. If this was some kind of cruel joke, it was a damn expensive one. Still, something in the lawyer's eyes told me this wasn't a mistake. "I'll go," I said finally. "But if this is a setup, tell whoever sent you I've got nothing left to lose." He gave a small nod. "Mr. Fulton, that's precisely why he chose you." That line stuck with me long after he left. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my tiny apartment, one room, peeling paint, the hum of the mini-fridge filling the silence, staring at that check on the table. Harold Fulton had been dead for 3 months, and somehow he still had something to say to me. By sunrise, I had packed my only bag. Before I walked out the door, I looked at the cracked mirror above the sink. My reflection looked older, smaller, worn out. But for the first time in years, there was a flicker of something behind my eyes. Not greed, not even curiosity. Hope. Before we move on to what happens next, subscribe for more stories like this, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The drive to Pine Hollow felt like crossing into another lifetime. The city lights faded in the rearview mirror, replaced by endless stretches of pine trees and winding 2-lane roads. My old Honda groaned the entire way, its engine whining every time I hit an incline. But with every mile, something inside me started to stir. A mixture of dread and anticipation I couldn't quite name. By the time I reached the outskirts of the Fulton estate, fog had rolled in so thick it looked like the world had disappeared. The GPS gave up a mile before the gate. That's when I saw it. The same wrought iron arch I remembered from childhood, half covered in ivy, with the letters Fulton Hall welded across the top. For a moment, I just sat there staring. The gates creaked open automatically. Someone had been expecting me. The driveway was long, winding, and lined with old oak trees. The house came into view like something out of a dream, or a warning. 3 stories of gray stone, with tall windows and a roof that looked sharp enough to cut the clouds. Every light in the house was on, casting a pale glow across the fog-drenched lawn. A butler, yes, an actual butler, opened the door before I even knocked. He was tall, dressed in black, his silver hair slicked back like polished steel. "Mr. Fulton," he said softly, as though saying my name carried weight. "We've been expecting you." Inside smelled of old wood, expensive cigars, and ghosts. The lawyer from the gas station stood in the foyer, holding a folder now instead of an envelope. "Mr. Fulton," he said with a nod. "Welcome home." Home. That word stung more than I expected. He led me into a large study where a fire crackled beneath a massive portrait of my Uncle Harold. I froze when I saw it. He looked older than I remembered. But those eyes, sharp, knowing, almost mischievous, still burned through the canvas. On the desk sat a single box, wooden, ornate, my initials carved into the top. "What is this?" I asked. "Your uncle's instructions," the lawyer said. "He wanted you to open it alone." The butler silently excused himself, and for a few seconds, the only sound was the fire and my heart pounding in my ears. I lifted the lid. Inside was an old photograph. Me, as a boy, sitting on a fence beside Uncle Harold. Both of us smiling, both of us covered in mud. Underneath the photo was a key, heavy, brass, attached to a small note written in my uncle's familiar handwriting. "Rodrik, if you're reading this, it means I was right about you, and wrong about your father. The truth is buried in the old mill. Trust no one but the man in the blue coat." The old mill. My pulse quickened. That place had been abandoned for decades, part of the old Fulton textile operation that burned down in the 80s. I stared at the note, reading it again and again, trying to make sense of the words. What truth? What about my father? I looked back at my uncle's portrait. For a split second, I could almost swear that faint, sly smile on his face had changed, like he was waiting for me to figure it out. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Will you be staying the night, Mr. Fulton?" I nodded slowly, still clutching the key. "Good," he said, turning to leave. "You'll need your rest." Because whatever waited at that old mill, it wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about uncovering a family secret buried for 40 years. That night, I couldn't sleep. The guest room they gave me was twice the size of my entire apartment. Ornate wallpaper, gold-framed mirrors, and a bed so soft it felt like sleeping on air. But all I could think about was that brass key sitting on the nightstand, glinting under the lamplight like it was alive. The words in my uncle's note kept repeating in my head. "The truth is buried in the old mill. Trust no one but the man in the blue coat." By 3 a.m., I gave up trying to sleep. I got dressed, grabbed my jacket, and slipped out of the mansion. The fog still lingered, thick and low, curling around the trees like smoke. I didn't even know where the old mill was anymore. But muscle memory guided me. My father used to take me there as a kid before it burned down. Said it was where the Fultons made their fortune. It took nearly half an hour of driving down dirt roads before I found it. The place looked like something out of a forgotten war. Half-collapsed walls, rusted machinery, and a gaping black doorway that looked like a mouth ready to swallow me whole. My headlights flickered across the structure, revealing the faded lettering on the sign. Fulton & Sons Textile Works. My last name. And yet, standing there, it didn't feel like it belonged to me. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The air was cold, damp, heavy with the scent of ash and oil. My flashlight beam danced over the broken floorboards and rusted gears. I kept walking deeper, each step creaking under my boots. Then I saw it, painted faintly on the wall, almost invisible beneath layers of dust and soot. A blue handprint. I froze. My uncle's note echoed in my mind. Trust no one but the man in the blue coat. My flashlight trembled in my hand. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, careful, coming from the far side of the mill. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice echoing through the hollow building. No response. Just the faint crunch of debris under boots. I took a step back, ready to bolt, when a shadow emerged from the far corner. A tall man, his coat dark navy, his hair silver under the flashlight beam. "You came?" he said quietly. "Who are you?" I asked, clutching the key in my pocket. He gave a faint smile. "Your uncle said you'd be stubborn. Name's Paul Granger. I worked for your family 40 years ago, before your father took over." The name hit me like a brick. My dad had mentioned a Paul once, said he was a traitor who'd stolen from the company. "My father fired you," I said. Paul nodded slowly. "That's what he told everyone. But it wasn't me who stole from the business, Rodrik. It was him, and he framed me to cover what he'd done." I blinked, trying to process his words. "What are you talking about?" Paul stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Your uncle tried to stop him. That's why your father cut him out of the business. And when Harold died, he left everything to you, because he knew you were the only Fulton he could trust." The ground beneath me seemed to tilt. My father, the man who'd raised me, who'd told me hard work was all that mattered, had lied to everyone. Paul looked toward the back of the mill. "There's something buried here. Your uncle told me to show you." When the time came, he pointed to a section of the floor where the planks had been pried up and nailed back down. That brass key in my pocket suddenly felt heavier than ever. Whatever was under that floor was going to change everything, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know what it was. The floorboards groaned as Paul knelt down, his flashlight beam tracing the edges of the planks that looked just slightly newer than the rest. The air was colder here, the kind of chill that didn't come from the wind, it came from the past. He took out a crowbar from a nearby toolbox, the metal scraping against wood as he pried the first board loose. The sound echoed through the mill, sharp and unsettling. I crouched beside him, my heart pounding harder with every creak. Beneath the boards was a small wooden chest, old, dust-covered, and sealed with a familiar brass lock. The same color as the key my uncle had left me. Paul looked at me, saying nothing. I reached into my pocket, my hand trembling, and slid the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click, almost too easily, like it had been waiting for this moment. Inside, wrapped in a faded blue cloth, were stacks of documents, yellowed papers, legal seals, and ledgers, all marked with the Fulton & Sons emblem. But it wasn't the company name that froze my blood. It was the signatures. My father's. Dozens of them. Beneath transactions that moved massive sums of money into private accounts, fake contracts signed under shell companies, and one phrase that kept appearing: "Overseas asset transfer authorized." Paul leaned over my shoulder. "Your father hid millions, Rodrik. Money that was supposed to go to workers' pensions, company shares, taxes. He made it disappear, and blamed me when the auditors started asking questions." I swallowed hard, scanning the papers, the realization sinking in like a knife twist. "So this is proof?" Paul nodded. "Every signature, every account, every name he forged. It's all here." I sat back on my heels, staring at the chest. "Why didn't you tell anyone? Why not go public?" He sighed deeply, looking older than I remembered. "Your uncle tried. That's why your father cut him out. Harold wanted to clean the family's name before it was too late. But when he realized your father was too powerful, he hid everything and waited for you." The air between us felt thick. My father, the man I'd spent my life trying to impress, was a thief. My uncle, the man I barely knew, had trusted me with his life secret. Then I remembered something else. My cousin Daniel, the one who had taken my ex-wife, the one now running the company. "What about Daniel?" I asked, my voice low. "Does he know about this?" Paul's expression darkened. "He's your father's son in every way that matters. He's been moving money the same way, just smarter. The fortune your uncle left you, that $340 million, it was meant to expose them both." I froze. The words hit me harder than any punch. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that money isn't just yours, Rodrik. It's justice. Harold wanted you to use it to rebuild what your father destroyed." For a long moment I couldn't speak. The documents, the chest, the key, everything had led to this truth. Then, in the distance, the faint crunch of gravel broke the silence. Headlights glowed through the cracks of the mill's broken walls. Paul's face went pale. "We're not alone." He grabbed the documents, shoving them into his coat. "You have to go now." "What? Who is it?" Paul looked toward the door, his voice tense. "Daniel's men. He knows you're here." Before I could respond, the sharp glare of headlights flooded the mill, and the sound of car doors slamming echoed through the night. Paul turned to me, his jaw tight. "Run, Rodrik. Whatever happens, protect the truth. And then the first gunshot shattered the air. The gunshot cracked through the air like thunder. I ducked instinctively, my heart hammering in my chest as shards of wood burst from the wall beside me. Paul grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the back of the mill, his breath ragged. "Go! Through the side door!" he hissed. I stumbled after him, my boots slipping on the dusty floor. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Paul turned and fired back, the muzzle flash lighting up his face for a split second, just enough for me to see the fear in his eyes. We burst out into the freezing night air. The gravel crunched beneath us as we sprinted toward the tree line behind the mill. The headlights swept over the field like searchlights. Voices shouted behind us. "Rodrik, stop right there!" I recognized that voice, Daniel. Smooth, arrogant, calm. The same tone he used when he'd stolen everything from me years ago. My job, my reputation. And my wife. Paul shoved the chest into my hands. "Take it and run! Don't look back!" "What about you?" I gasped. "I'll hold them off." "Just go!" For a moment, I hesitated. But the second volley of gunfire made the choice for me. I turned and bolted into the woods, branches whipping against my face, my lungs burning. Behind me, I heard Paul shouting, then another gunshot, then silence. I didn't stop running until my legs gave out. I collapsed behind an old oak, clutching the chest to my chest like it was the only thing keeping me alive. The world felt impossibly still. The smell of smoke and gunpowder lingered in the air. I wanted to go back, to help Paul. But I knew if I did, everything, his sacrifice, my uncle's trust, would be for nothing. When dawn broke, I made my way to the highway, mud covering my clothes, my hands trembling. I hitchhiked into town and found the lawyer's office again. The same man who'd found me in that gas station bathroom looked up as I entered, his eyes widening when he saw the state I was in. "Mr. Fulton, what happened to you?" I dropped the chest on his desk with a thud. "They killed Paul. Daniel's behind it all. This," I pointed at the chest, "is what my uncle wanted you to see." He opened it carefully, sifting through the documents, his expression growing darker by the second. This is massive. These records tie your cousin and your father to embezzlement, offshore laundering, even tax fraud. This isn't just a family scandal. This is federal. I slumped into the chair across from him, my voice hoarse. "So what happens now?" He straightened his tie, already pulling out his phone. "Now, we make sure they pay. But you need protection, Rodrik. They won't stop. That money your uncle left you. It's leverage. But it's also bait. They'll come for it." I nodded slowly, my mind spinning. "Then let them. I've been cleaning floors long enough. Maybe it's time to clean house." For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't in a long while. Purpose. I wasn't just the man who'd been left behind anymore. I was the man they underestimated. As I walked out of that office into the pale morning light, I could almost hear my uncle's voice again, calm, steady, certain. "Family can build empires, Rodrik, or burn them down. Just make sure you're the one holding the match." By the end of that week, the story broke nationwide. Fulton family fortune under federal investigation. Every major news network ran it. My cousin Daniel's smug face flashed across every screen, escorted in handcuffs by federal agents outside his luxury condo in Miami. My father, Harold Fulton, was taken in for questioning the next morning. But while the world saw headlines, I saw ghosts. I'd spent decades in the shadow of these men, cleaning bathrooms while they sat on stolen millions. Watching them fall didn't feel like victory. It felt like the crumbling of everything I once thought family meant. The lawyer, his name was Martin, called me into his office again. His desk was covered in open folders and news clippings. "Rodrik," he said, rubbing his temples. "They're freezing assets, questioning board members, everything. But before this explodes completely, there's something else you should see." He slid a thin envelope across the table. "Your uncle's personal confession. Dated 3 weeks before his death." I hesitated before opening it. My hands shook as I unfolded. The paper, his familiar handwriting staring back at me. "If you're reading this, Rodrik, it means the truth has finally surfaced. I was complicit once. I helped your father and Daniel bury what they stole. I justified it as protecting the family, but all it did was destroy us from within. You were the only honest one, and that's why I left everything to you. I know they'll come for it, and I know you'll want revenge. But don't let this inheritance become another weapon. Use it to rebuild what our name once meant. Integrity. I sat there in silence, tears burning in my eyes. My uncle had carried guilt for decades, and I'd hated him for things I never understood. When I looked up, Martin was watching me quietly. He believed in you, Rodrik. You might be the only Fulton left who deserves that fortune. That night, I couldn't sleep. The motel ceiling above me was cracked and water-stained. The hum of the air conditioner the only sound in the room. I thought about Melody, my ex-wife, and Daniel, the man she'd left me for. They had built a life on deceit, wealth, and luxury. And now that empire was turning to ash. I turned on the TV out of habit and froze. There she was. Melody. Being escorted into a courthouse, face hidden behind oversized sunglasses. The headline, Melody Fulton Cooper, named in fraud investigation. For years, she'd laughed at me, called me a loser, said I'd never be anything. And now she was the one being dragged into the fire Daniel started. But instead of satisfaction, I just felt empty. The next morning, Martin called again. Rodrik, the FBI wants to talk to you. They've recovered more documents. And there's one more surprise, a private vault under your uncle's name. You're the only one authorized to access it. A vault. My stomach turned. More secrets. More buried truth. I took a deep breath. Where? Cleveland. Tomorrow morning. As I hung up, I stared at my reflection in the motel mirror. A man with lines of exhaustion, but eyes that finally burned with something stronger than despair. For 40 years, I'd been kept in the dark. Tomorrow, I'd open whatever my uncle left behind, and maybe, just maybe, find the last piece of the puzzle. The part that would explain why he'd left me everything. The next morning, I drove to Cleveland with a mix of dread and curiosity boiling in my chest. The vault was located beneath a discreet, century-old bank on Euclid Avenue. The kind of place that looked untouched by time, with brass handles polished to a shine and marble floors echoing every step. Martin met me there, holding a single key attached to a tarnished brass tag. Your uncle's personal vault, he said, handing it to me. No one's opened it since he died. He left explicit instructions that it was for your eyes only. A manager escorted us down a narrow hallway lined with steel doors, each labeled with fading numbers. When he stopped at 23B and turned the lock, my pulse kicked into overdrive. The heavy door creaked open with a groan, releasing a musty metallic smell. Inside were two things. A wooden chest and a leather briefcase. No gold bars, no stacks of money, just history. I lifted the lid of the chest first. Inside were old photographs, my father and uncle as teenagers, standing in front of the family factory. Letters bundled with twine. Newspaper clippings about Fulton Manufacturing's meteoric rise. And beneath them, a single photograph that made my blood run cold. It was of my father, Daniel, and Melody, my ex-wife, sitting together at a dinner table I didn't recognize. The date scribbled on the back. April 2017. A full year before she left me. Martin leaned over my shoulder. Rodrik, this means I know what it means, I said through clenched teeth. She'd been with them long before the divorce. She'd known about the money, about the lies, about everything. I opened the briefcase next. Inside were sealed folders marked confidential and one labeled for Rodrik. I pulled it out and flipped it open. It contained a detailed account. A written confession of how my father and cousin had laundered millions through shell companies. But there was something more shocking at the end. My mother's name. Harold forced your mother to sign false statements after she discovered the first transfer. When she refused to keep silent, he staged her breakdown and had her institutionalized. She wasn't unstable. She was silenced. I felt my knees give way. My mother, the woman I'd been told died from a stroke, had been framed. Martin steadied me. Rodrik, there's more. Look at this. He handed me another folder. Inside was a single sheet from a private facility in upstate New York. The date was recent, 6 months ago. Patient discharge summary. Evelyn Fulton. Your mother's alive? Martin said softly. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the paper, my throat tightening. She'd been alive this whole time. Hidden away. Forgotten. The next few hours were a blur. I left the vault trembling, the Cleveland wind biting my face as I stood outside the bank. Everything I knew about my life, my father, my marriage, even my mother's death, was a lie orchestrated by the people I trusted most. I called Martin from the parking lot. Find her. Whatever it takes. I want to see my mother, already working on it, he said. But Rodrik. If she's been hidden for this long, someone powerful wanted her gone. Be careful. I hung up, clutching the discharge paper like a lifeline. For the first time in decades, I had something worth fighting for. Not revenge, not money. The truth. And I wasn't going to stop until I found her. 3 days later, Martin called. Rodrik. We found her. Those words hit me like a freight train. My heart started pounding so hard I could barely breathe. After everything, the lies, the betrayal, the years of grief, my mother was alive. He gave me an address to a care facility just outside Syracuse, a quiet place surrounded by pines and fog. The kind of place you'd never notice driving by. He said she'd been moved there under a different name, Evelyn Harris, and that she'd been kept under a private arrangement paid for by an anonymous account that traced back to my father's old company. The drive up felt endless. Every mile closer made my chest heavier. I rehearsed what I'd say to her, how to explain why I hadn't come for her sooner, why I believed she was gone. But how do you prepare for a conversation you've been waiting 30 years to have? When I arrived, the nurse at the desk looked hesitant. You're here for Mrs. Harris? She asked, scanning the visitor sheet. She's very quiet, doesn't talk much. She led me down a long hallway lined with soft yellow lights. The air smelled faintly of lavender and antiseptic. I could hear the low hum of a TV playing in one of the rooms, and then she opened a door. There she was, sitting by a window, her silver hair catching the sunlight. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned toward me. Those eyes! I knew those eyes, Mom, I whispered. Her face froze, then softened. Tears welled up instantly. Rodrik? She said, her voice weak but certain. I broke. Every ounce of anger, guilt, and sorrow I'd carried for decades came flooding out. I dropped to my knees beside her chair, and she reached out a trembling hand, touching my cheek as if making sure I was real. I thought you were dead, I choked. She shook her head. No, sweetheart. They told me you were gone. We both cried. The kind of cry that comes from places words can't reach. For a long time we didn't speak. We just held on, as if to make up for the years that had been stolen from us. When she finally began to talk, her story came out in broken fragments. How she'd discovered Harold and my father moving money through offshore accounts. How she confronted them. How, within a week, she was diagnosed with delusions and admitted to a private psychiatric facility. How they kept her sedated, medicated, hidden, until Harold's death freed the funds that had been keeping her locked away. They said it was for my own good, she whispered. They said I was unstable. But I remember everything. I sat there, fists clenched, my mind spinning. My father hadn't just betrayed me. He destroyed the one person who truly loved me. When I told her about Melody, my ex-wife, and the inheritance, she nodded slowly. Your uncle wanted to make it right, she said. He wasn't as cruel as your father. He saw what happened to me. He knew someday the truth would have to come out. The nurse gently knocked on the door to remind us of visiting hours, but I wasn't leaving. Not yet. I'd lost her once. I wasn't losing her again. Before I left that night, she held my hand and said something that will stay with me forever. Rodrik, she whispered. Don't let the money consume you. Your father's curse was greed. Break it. As I walked out into the cold Syracuse night, I looked up at the stars and made her a promise. This time, I wouldn't just seek revenge. I'd rebuild everything they tried to destroy, in her name. 2 weeks after finding my mother, I sat in my small apartment, the same one where I'd eaten dollar store ramen for years, now holding a letter with my uncle's signature embossed in gold. It was his final message, written a month before his death. Rodrik, if you're reading this, then the truth has finally found you. Your father built his empire on deceit, but you, my boy, have something he never did, conscience. That's why I chose you. I didn't leave you the fortune as a reward. I left it as a test. Money doesn't reveal character. It amplifies it. Use it to rebuild, not to destroy. As I finished reading, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. The next morning, I drove back to Syracuse and told my mother I was moving her into a small house overlooking the lake. Not a mansion, not an estate, just a warm, quiet place where she could see the sunrise again. I didn't buy the Mercedes or the penthouse I could easily afford. Instead, I reopened my uncle's old community fund, the one my father shut down when greed took over, and started pouring resources into scholarships, addiction recovery programs, and small-town clinics. Melody tried calling once. I didn't answer. Some ghosts are best left behind. As for my cousin Harold's legacy, the money, the secrets, the empire, it all led me back to one truth. Wealth means nothing if it costs you your soul. So now, when I scrub a counter or wipe a table, I smile, because I remember where I came from, and who I became despite it. Before we move on to what's next, subscribe for more stories like this, and tell me, where are you watching from?